Sigrid, do you think I need to say goodbye to my closest friends?
I think you should do whatever you want to do.
Pedro Almodóvar is so brilliant at creating this sort of modern melodrama. Like it's this like very grounded, but also sort of stylized, heightened reality. And I'd love to know how you kind of, what it was like sort of entering Almodóvar world, like, and how you kind of as an actor modulate your tone to sort of match that.
That's the trick, right? I mean, I think that's what's interesting about what we do, and as an actor, when you come in, the most important thing a director can communicate to you is point of view. And Pedro has such a distinct point of view. And even, I remember early on, our really wonderful cinematographer, Edu Grau, it was the first time he'd worked with Pedro too. And Inbal Weinberg, who was our production designer, and we were all talking about this, and Edu was like, we are all here because of the way that Pedro sees the world. He sees it so specifically. So you're always kind of looking, like listening for these cues, trying to think like, how do we do this? And Pedro will even say, though, even though this is his first movie in English, it's very much a Spanish film. It's still his voice, and we saw that in the language, where there's a kind of a heightened sensibility. It's not quite English vernacular. It's really, Pedro kind of writes in a sort of a poetry. And even when he's listening to it, he's listening sometimes not for the language, but for the musicality of the language. He's like, where does it rise? Where does it fall? And certainly, in the way the film looks, I mean, visually, the colors are so rich and so saturated, and the way that the women dress, we're clearly, it's almost a heightened sense of dressing too, and they're made up because Pedro believes in beauty and loves women. And so all of these different values sort of infuse the film. So there's this, like I said, there's a fairy tale quality and a heightened sensibility, and yet there's a really deep, very rooted sense of emotion. So I think that juxtaposition of this kind of, like you said, melodrama, or this this height to it, and then that sense kind of like really deep humanity is very particular to Pedro, and ends up being really incredibly moving when you watch his films.
Yeah, completely. I also thought a little about your work with Todd Haynes when watching this film, who's also someone, I think, who handles that melodrama so well, that balance.
Yeah.
And similar to last year's May December, this is a film about two women and about a kind of complicated relationship between these two women. And I'm curious if there's something about those kind of female-focused projects that draws you in specifically, and if that's something you see kind of reaching across your career, that like urge to talk about relationships between women that aren't necessarily sort of black and white, I suppose.
I think I have an interest in relationships, in just human relationships. I mean, when I look at my choices and I think about the things that I'm drawn to, and I've said this before, that I very rarely have played like characters who are like adventurers, or people who are like royalty, or someone who goes to outer space, or I not that I wouldn't, because I would, but I think the kinds of things that I've been drawn to have been about the lives that we live and the relationships that we have and how we interact with each other. I just tend to be very, very moved by that and intrigued by it. So whether they're women or whether they're men, or it's all been, that's sort of been the stuff of my career. And in this case, I think what's been so valuable and so interesting is that we so very, very rarely see a movie about profound female friendship. Often we see antagonists, like in May December, but in this is probably closer to the female relationships that we experience as women, where they're a source of incredible support and love and companionship.
I'll sleep with my door open, and the day that you find it closed is the day it's already happened.
I completely lost faith in people doing the right thing.
I'm learning from her, and you should too.
I couldn't talk to you about an Almodóvar film without asking you about the look of the film. It is such a beautifully designed film, as you say, from top to bottom, incredible costumes, incredible sets, and I'd love to know what it was like filming in this beautiful modernist house. Was it in upstate New York?
Nope, it was in Madrid.
Wow, really? You'd never know.
No,
you really wouldn't.
The majority of the film was shot in Madrid,
sure.
and then that house was in a town called El Escorial, which is about an hour outside of Madrid. But because that's Pedro's world, that's where he lives. And then we shot about 10 days actually in New York City proper. But I think that, it's also not quite, I live in New York City, so I'm very familiar with it. And so it's not New York per se, it's Pedro's dream of New York. The movie's like a fairy tale. And I think you see that in all of the production design. You see that in the clothes that we wear, which are really lovely, beautiful, sumptuous clothes. And in the makeup, you see it in our lipstick and our shiny hair. And you see this in the gorgeous production design. And I think for me and Tilda too, there was a moment where we walked into that house. And, I looked at the composition, I looked at those beautiful windows, and I saw those colors, I looked down at my clothes, I was like, oh, I'd actually entered his film, entered his world. This is the way that Pedro sees things. This is how he feels stories being told. And it communicates, I think, so much emotion to the audience in every single frame.
Did you have a favorite thing that you wore, or a favorite item in the house?
Item, what am I? Oh God, I loved everything.
I
think I really loved my green turtleneck.
It's a great
It was a great green, and it was a great color, and it's probably not something that I would wear in real life, because oddly in real life I sort of feel like I don't want to call attention to myself, and it just felt so alive, and it really felt like Ingrid to me.
Yeah, and you have this. I mean, you look incredible, and it's two incredible performances at the heart of this movie. And I'd love to know what it was like working opposite Tilda Swinton, who is so brilliant.
I loved her. She is absolutely brilliant in this. And it was amazing to have that kind of an acting partner and that kind of a friendship develop in real time. You don't know, you never know what's going to happen with another actor, and that's the exciting part of it too. Is that you create it together. That I bring my work here, she brings her work here, and what we make is ours. And I also, our friendship developed in real time. She's someone I admired so much. I think she's just such a wonderful actor and a really cool person. And we spent time together. We got to know each other, and every day we got closer and closer until we developed a real relationship, which was wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah, you're the sort of little, when I think about the film, I think of yourself and Tilda and Pedro as this kind of little triangle of creativity. And what was the kind of, do you feel like, how was the kind of collaboration in bringing this story to light? Obviously, it's adapted from a book, and
right.
Did you find yourself going to the source text when you were thinking about the film?
I mean, certainly I read that was what Pedro was inspired by Sigrid Nunez's book, and I read that and actually met with her before we started shooting and thought about that and thought about New York, but then that's just like one element that you bring in, because of course, like I have that in my experience of New York, and then Pedro has all of his ideas and Tilda has all of hers, and then you end up in Spain trying to create it. And I think the wonderful thing about making a movie is that there are so many influences. There are so many people who bring things to the table. But we are really serving Pedro's vision too. He's making a particular story, and it's like you have to become a conduit for that. I think I was interested. I was actually most interested in the subtleties of the female relationship, in the fact that I think one of the most wonderful things is like when she discovers that she's not going to be recovering from this illness. There's almost nothing that Ingrid can say to her, because what can you say to somebody? But what Ingrid does say is, "I'll see you tomorrow," which is kind of the most moving, important thing you can say to somebody, which is like, I'll be here for you. I'm going to show up for you. And so I think that was the element that Pedro was bringing too. What are all those? Where is all that humanity? How is that in our relationships? How does that manifest in the world? How does it manifest in design and beauty and nature?
Completely. That's a really lovely way to think about it. To be that's sort of there for somebody in the most straightforward, unfussy way. There's no necessarily like You know, it's not sort of florid. You're just like,
Right.
I will be there for
I'll
you.
be there tomorrow.
I'll see you.
Yeah.
So I'm from Picture House. We're a cinema company, and I would love to know if there were any kind of major, I mean, I'm sure there's been many, but any kind of major cinematic influences in your life, any cinema-going experiences that you feel like really shaped your approach to your work or your life, or anything specific?
I mean, I think that, and I've spoken about this before, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but I think Robert Altman was really his films were the ones that made me want to be a film actor. Up until then, I don't think I'd ever really noticed. I mean, I was, 19 years old. I don't think I'd ever really understood what a directorial voice was, what that meant to tell a story on screen. And I saw 3 women at a revival house, and I was so struck by it, once again, by his point of view, by his storytelling, by how personal everything felt, and by how wonderful those performances were. Sissy Spacek and Shelley Duvall and Janice Rule, how I was just completely gobsmacked by what they did, and that made me think, oh, I think that's what I want to do. I think I want to be a film actor, and so then of course I saw all of Altman's movies, and I really started looking at movies seriously. But that was the movie that changed the course of my life.
It's daytime. And you're alive.
Thank you for watching Picture House Cinema's unique video content. Hit the subscribe button to be kept up to date with our movie news, cast and crew interviews, highlights, trailers, and lots more.